Welcome to another episode of Tayde El Ratón. Today we're going to be talking about the civic responsibilities of the young, furious Latina entrepreneur from the political, cultural, financial standpoint. Stay tuned. Ratón, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well, Tayde. Buen día.
Buen día, buen día. So today we have... Oh, I'm sorry.
I said I'm happy to be with you.
No, thank you. So today we have this topic that I'm pretty sure is going to be of interest to many that watch this video. And it has a lot to do with the civic responsibilities that we have as Americans, and that oftentimes, from my perspective, I feel like we forget about them. Maybe because, and I'm gonna ask you some questions as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and I want you to try to elaborate a little bit on this conversation to see what comes out of it. But over the last 13 years, you know that I have been involved with over 14,000 business owners that we have served through the Hispanic Chamber of E-commerce. And one thing that I notice as a common factor among all these, or the majority of these business owners, Raton, is that they usually don't get actively involved in anything that is relevant to the community. A lot of them do not vote, which I think it's a big mistake. And a lot of them don't get involved in anything that has to do with education, public safety, you name it, because business owners can have different interests, right? So from your perspective and following up on this narrative that we have about the young, female and furious Latina entrepreneur, what message can we share to them so when they start getting more active, with their business, and they start getting more visibility, maybe their business goes to the next level, what can we share, with them to motivate them to get more involved in all these different activities that we just mentioned?
With this topic that you bring up, Tayde, I like that my experience with the Small Business Administration, which is one of the many divisions of the U.S. government that does have a cabinet position, right? They're pretty apolitical, and especially as it relates to our community. So we have seen over the last 30 years multiple Latinas heading the Small Business Administration.
Yeah.
And what I've also seen is even in Republican presidencies, as well as Democratic presidencies, all of them sort of do the talk about the power of the Latino and Latina entrepreneur. Basically, I think what they do is they see the numbers, right? They see the demographic changes in the United States, and they say, we are seeing that Latino and Latina entrepreneurs are the future by a long shot. Like, there is no other community that even compares with our numbers. But when you go in and look at civic participation, for example, we are not the leaders. I do think, to be fair, because I know Maria Teresa Kumar and several other people from Voto Latino and other similar nonprofits and organizations, that we are making a difference in civic duty, but we're definitely not the leaders, right? And so, just like you said, there comes a point where, one, you sort of have to surrender your sort of immigrant persona, It's
Mm.
something that I have not done yet, right? Like I am full zapatista until I die, right? And
Yeah.
that's not helpful to anybody, especially me.
Hmm.
Uh, but then it becomes okay, one, what are you doing to get informed as a business person
Hmm.
and as a voter or as an engaged member of your community, whether you think that's a national community, whether you think that's a regional community, statewide or local? And then, what are you doing to support the rest of the community if, for example, it's not beneficial to you as a business person, right? Like maybe immigration related topics don't necessarily affect you as an individual, but they definitely affect our community. So those are all really complex questions that I'd love to talk about with you.
No, and you know what? Even like economic issues and healthcare issues that are very relevant to the business community, um, and it's kind of like top of mind for a lot of them. It surprises me that uh, they don't probably they don't have the time or the interest. I don't know, but I can tell you, Raton, that there has been, especially during election years or even on election day, I have received messages from some of our members asking us to like, uh, so on prop whatever, how should I vote? You know, like asking us on direction on how they should vote for those that are voting, right? Because, like I said, unfortunately, the majority of them do not vote unless there is like a presidential election. Usually, that's when Latinos come out and vote in bigger numbers than the midterms. But what worries me is that they are not getting informed. So what can we do to motivate our community to look at politics not just like, oh, it's like a politics don't do any politicians don't do anything and they're all corrupted, and I get it, because some of that mentality comes from, like, if you're an immigrant, it comes from Mexico. You're not even, I mean, if you're Mexican, right? But you think about PRI and that they were always controlling the elections, and you kind of grew up feeling like, my vote doesn't count. But we live in a democracy where your vote actually counts. And if you get involved, you know, you can make things better. Because that
Well,
is, I
I,
forgot, I'm
I,
sorry, I forgot one more topic. I forgot. It's economy, healthcare, and education. Because a lot of our members, Raton, complain about school districts
for
and
sure.
the lack of resources in some of the schools and stuff, and that could be changed if they were involved in the elections, or at least exercising the right to vote in important matters.
Absolutely. But I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Because for somebody to be able to make a difference in the United States, I'm not even talking about Mexico, because I disagree with you a little bit in that I understand your perspective of the PRI, for example, but I do not believe that the United States is any different than Mexico or any other country in the world. Like I don't think that the United States sets itself apart as a democracy where, I matter. Like absolutely not.
Yeah, we
But
saw some issues in the last election, that's for sure. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
in terms of leadership, that double-edged sword becomes the minute that you start to get involved, like really, really, really involved, like not only with your time and effort, but also with your money. That's when you start to really take an interest in your self-interest, right?
Hmm.
Like, why am I investing so much time and effort and money into something that is not necessarily going to be immediately short term beneficial for me? I have short term needs, and none of this effort, time, and money is contributing to my short term needs.
That's a
It
really good
might not
point.
even be contributing to my long term needs, right?
Hmm.
And what I do think, Tayde, is that one of the crimes of the United States, and forgive me because that's the only system that I know really well, is the way that the legal industry gets involved in, for example, the words used for propositions.
Mm.
It is so confusing to know not only what it is that you're voting for or against, but who the beneficiaries are, both, like direct and indirect, right? And so I think if I was being fair to the members of any organizations that you've been involved with, I would say, how much time do I have to invest to even understand what it is that they're trying to trick me into or not into?
That
That investment is major.
that is a really good point. I forgot about how complex these propositions are to read sometimes, and even like here at your casa, with my wife, it takes two brains, to try to figure out what they actually mean with these props, because like sometimes they try to make it like, oh, we're supporting education, but when you go, like, I think it was Prop 15, when you read it and you read the fine print, you realize that the economic impact of that proposition will be greater than the actual benefit to the education system. So you're right. I mean, it's tricky, and and oftentimes we don't have the time, especially like entrepreneurs, like with less than 5 employees, they're wearing so many hats, trying to solve those short-term needs that you talk about it, and they don't have time to invest like an hour or 2 hours trying to figure out what they're going to be voting
Days,
for.
days, not even hours, days.
That's
But
that's
so,
the prop, yeah. But how
I
can
would
we?
actually,
I mean, I know it will take like more than the time that we have right now to try to figure that thing out. But I think the first step is just like to start voting for at least candidates. Forget about prepositions, like candidates. So don't you agree that that would be like a really nice step? Because here in California, I mean, Latinos are not voting at the level that we are growing as a population.
I would pose something completely different to you, Taide, and I think it's a good suggestion to make, especially to somebody like you, because of how you phrased the question that you posed originally. And I'm going to do it by way of anecdote. I know for a fact that the people at Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles share a common goal and vision in life, which is that every human being, regardless of any identifier, should be treated with compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I know that for a fact. And I also know that they have more resources than I do. They have legal teams, they have administrative teams, they have civic teams, they have all of these things, right?
Uh-huh.
So typically in an election, what I will do is I will knock out probably about a third of all the things that I need to vote for simply by asking Homeboy Industries, what do you recommend as how my vote should look like?
Should look like. Mm.
And so, and I don't question it, right? I say, I trust this organization to give me the right advice.
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, that's because I know Homeboy Industries really well, and I know Father Greg Boyle really well. He has been my spiritual advisor for many years, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody is going to Tayde Aburto as the leader of the Hispanic Chamber of E-commerce, and he's saying, I know for a fact that Tayde has the interest of Latino and Latina entrepreneurs completely, without a doubt in mind, and he's telling me you should vote yes here, no here, yes here, no here, yes, that's good enough for me.
I know, and it has happened. Trust me, it has happened many times. And And I don't like to take that responsibility, but I just tell them like, look, I did my research and this is how I'm boarding, but you can do yours, but this is how I'm boarding. And all of a sudden, oftentimes, some of them even like take a picture and send it to me. It's like, I voted the same way. Look, it's kind of like they feel excited about it for some reason. But you're right. I think
It should be a membership perk, right? Like for people who are actually contributing financial commitments to the Hispanic Chamber of E-commerce, you should have enough of a budget to contract with professionals that can then say, and video is a wonderful example of this, that can say, this is how we're recommending you vote, and this is why. And that gets into what they call PACs and super PACs and all sorts of ways where we as a community lobby together, everybody as a unified voice, which I think is crucial to this conversation of civic responsibility. That one of the problems that the Mexican community, whether they be in Mexico or in the United States, has, in contrast to, for example, the Cuban community, the Cuban community has one goal at all times, and that is to go against Castro.
mm-hmm.
Like, that is it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else matters beyond that. The Jewish community has one goal in mind: to support Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nothing else matters besides that, at least, in the core. Mexicans, you have left-leaning Mexicans, you have right-leaning Mexicans, you have left-leaning Chicanos, which are completely different. You have right-leaning Chicanos. You have, what the term that everybody loves using is that we're not monolithic. Well, I think we absolutely should be monolithic.
Yeah, I know.
Without a doubt.
I agree with that. It is definitely a challenge. It's a challenge. And, I've been living here for a short period of time. At least that's how it feels, 15 years. And I started voting in 2008. And I haven't, from those prominent Latinos that have run for office, I haven't seen one that have ignited the community to get support behind them. I don't know why it is. I still haven't been able to figure it out. Maybe it has a lot to do with what you just said, that we're a very complex community. But still, if it happened in Mexico, where, this president was able to get a historical amount of votes because he was able to motivate people to get out to vote, I think that could happen here in the States too at some point.
It should, but it really depends on the leader. And one of the things that we do talk about in political circles, Tayde, is you hear definitely around voting time, there's a mantra, and that mantra is go out and vote. Okay? And it's kind of condescending in a way, because they're like, no brainer, you should be voting. But then when you actually get down to it, like, who am I actually voting for? Like, why am I voting for this person, and how does this person care about my needs or my interests? And I think it's really, really difficult when you start to get involved, like at least to the level that I'm involved. You start to know that none of them have my interests in mind. Like, my primary interest for the United States is for them to give land back to the indigenous. Who on earth cares about giving the land back that they stole from the indigenous peoples? I can assure you that it's nobody that's in political power in my circle, right? It's not Becerra, it's not Padilla, it's not Newsom, it's not Harris, it's not Biden. Like, all of them are actually in cahoots to maintain indigenous land that was stolen from the indigenous peoples.
Yeah,
right?
you are Zapatista, Ratón.
Yeah, like
But
come on.
it's good because
So,
I
so
think
then you
it's.
end up voting for the lesser of two evils, Tayde, and that hurts.
Mhm. No, I think it's important that these ideas are discussed and not ignored. And especially this time of where we are just kind of like starting to see the light after this pandemic, a historical crisis that impacted the world. And I think it's time to start thinking about rebuilding and making things better. For not just for us, but for our children and the youngest generations that are coming on there. We cannot leave them a mess, and I think it's important that we conduct an assessment of the different ideas that are going to help to keep our community growing in a sustainable way, in a more inclusive way, and that will be beneficial to keep. I mean, not just for our community, but for every American. And I love. I think we should start, addressing this issue a little more in our conversations, Raton, and especially like we were talking about this earlier, that we may have an election in November or something like that for to elect a governor if the recall goes through. So I think it is important for Californians to get really involved in this election that may happen.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to take it in a different direction than you, because what you and I are attempting to do in our own way with very little resources is to make a media contribution. We're trying to put information out into the world that says, please take an interest in the young female and furious Latina entrepreneur,
Hmm.
because the reason why I set that up is because I don't see that anybody has that interest
Yeah,
in the mainstream media, right? But Taide, let's be honest, like our visibility is, a couple dozen people who maybe know us, right? Like
yeah,
my mom and your
yeah,
mom. Like like we don't have the power of, CNN or Wall Street Journal or New York Times. And there's a reason why they don't want to give us that power, right? So, and then, and I'll just footnote that by saying we're not even the proper representatives of that. Like we're two 40-year-old Mexican men. Like, what do we know about the perspective of young female and furious Latinas? I'm doing my part to get them involved, but at the end of the day, that actually is it's very interesting how, and I know for a fact that your wife talks to you about this. Is like, why do you and I waste our time doing these media contributions that have low visibility,
no, no,
right? Like
yeah.
we could be spending our times making money. We
Mhm.
could be spending our time obfuscating that we're Mexican, and just making more and more and more money so that we could just keep on padding our bank accounts, right? Like that's what we talked about last week, is how much cash should you have freezing in your in your savings account,
Yeah.
right? And so that gets into questions of, if you got a major contract, I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't be calling me on Thursday at 11, to make a video that 20 people are going to see, right? Like you're going to have bigger fish to fry. But the reason why you and I do it, and I'll speak for myself and open it up to you, is because I do want to be a part of a community, and I don't want my community to look the way that it looks now, with 60, 70, 80-year-old men with all the power.
And I think that's a really good statement to wrap up this video, Raton. And I think that what we are working on here is to leave a legacy, and we're on our way to make that happen. And you start one video at a time, one view at a time, and you'll see what we'll be in 5 years from now. and we are recording it. It's gonna live in YouTube, so people can watch this in 2027, 2026, and then we'll see where we are.
All right. I trust you.
All right, Ratón. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Tayde.
Hasta luego. Un abrazo.